Night, everybody. That means it's time for second look. We are in Revelation 20 tonight. What we have been doing up to this point is realizing that probably the better way to look at the book of Revelation, rather than looking at it as linear chronology, which is where we get the Bible timelines and end time timelines and all that. And that's the way that traditionally it has been looked at least traditionally in the last 150 or 60 years. But maybe a better way to look at it, and it kind of dawns on us when you read all of Revelation in a setting, you get the distinct impression what I'm looking at here may not be linear chronology. In other words, chapter 6 follows chapter 5, and then 7, and then this event, and then that event, all the way up to the New Eden, New Jerusalem, Eden restored. That maybe a better way to look at it better than that may be not linear chronology, but what we're looking at is cycles of repetition. You get these different judgments on the nations and on the world system, variously called Babylon or the beast. And it seems like it's repeated over and over again, and that's the distinct impression you get when you read the whole thing at one sitting, which I would advise anybody to do. It doesn't take you that long. So we've kind of been working from that premise, and we're seeing repetition here in chapter 20 in things that we've seen earlier. In some of the earlier chapters, chapter 18, chapter 16, chapter 13, you get the distinct impression that, hey, we've been in this neighborhood before. So we're going to be in chapter 20. I think we will get pretty much all the way through it. It's a jam-packed chapter, and the study guide there, if you're present, may help you a little bit. Let's just jump in, okay? And if you'll indulge me, I'll read. I promise I won't read it slow. I'm working from the New American Standard, and here's the way it reads. Then, this is John talking, of course. This is one of his visions. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding a key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand. Wonder what the chain's for. And he laid hold of the dragon. Who are we talking about? We've seen dragons before. The serpent of old. Okay, now it's beginning to click. All the way back to Genesis 3. The serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan. And he bound him for 1,000 years. We often conflate devil and Satan and say they are identical. In the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, they are not necessarily identical. Sometimes they are, but not usually. Because the word Satan, Hebrew word ha-satan, means the Satan, the adversary. The word Satan means adversary. And there are many adversaries in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the Old Testament. There are adversaries in the New Testament. And they're not all the devil. You get a character in the book of Job that appears not to be the devil. He's some kind of prosecuting attorney type figure, but he is not the devil, but he is an adversary. He is a ha-satan. And there are a lot of different ha-satans in the Old Testament. Sometimes the devil is called a ha-satan because he is the arch adversary. But not in every case. In fact, there are a couple cases where God, Yahweh, is called ha-satan, the adversary, the Satan. So while we typically, in popular thought, we say, oh, the devil, that's a synonym for Satan. Not always. But in this case, yes. And we're identified who this particular adversary is. This particular ha-satan is himself the devil. A word that means accuser. In the vein of a slanderer. So for our purposes tonight, and you may want to fill this in, we're going to treat the devil as a mudslinger. He's a mudslinger. You know what I mean by a mudslinger. An accuser, a slanderer. So that's who we've got here. And it says that he's laid hold of by an angel coming down from heaven. And he bound him for 1,000 years. Before we move very much further, jump back into Revelation 12. Look at verse number 7, look at verse number 9. Somebody read those for us. Revelation 12, then jump down to verse 7.
Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him.
There's an awful lot of throwing down in the book of Revelation. You may have noticed it already. They throw down a mountain. They throw down a great stone. Here they throw down the devil and his angels, and Michael is the angel, the agent that does that. And so it does seem that we've seen this before, we've been in this neighborhood before, and here we are again. It seems that what we saw in chapter 12, we're seeing again in chapter 20. And he bound him 1,000 years, and he threw him into the abyss, and shut it, and sealed it over, so he's captive, so that he would not deceive the nations. Remember, the ethne are a big focus all the way back to Deuteronomy 32, where we're told that the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, these divine beings, are allotted the different nations. But Yahweh says, but Jacob, Israel, will be my inheritance. And that's where we're off to the races in the Old Testament. But the nations are always a focus. And the nations, though they're allotted to these rival, what become rival gods, they abuse their power. We've learned that in Psalm 22. And for that they will die like men, Psalm 82 says. But though they are under these rival gods, they're never very far from Yahweh's mind. And the grand plan is that he will buy them back. He will get them back. These ones that have sworn allegiance to these rival gods that Paul in the New Testament will tell us they are demons, what we think of as demons. And so we're seeing a confrontation getting ready here. But for now there's a secession. And he does not deceive the nations any longer until 1,000 years were completed. After these things, he must be released for a short time. Then I saw thrones. We've seen thrones before, haven't we? Revelation 4, Revelation 5, the divine council scene, the throne room scene, the courtroom scene. That is a legal proceeding where there's a document, a scroll, that nobody can open, and then the Lamb comes along and begins to open seal by seal. And when it is finally unrolled completely, then all of this begins to transpire. These things that we see repeated over and over again, which is essentially a judgment of those rival gods, a judgment of the world system, Babylon, and a judgment of the nations that align themselves with all that, most especially in persecuting the people of God. And then you've got the martyrs under the altar saying, how long, how long? God says, hold on. I'm working on something here. Well, that's what we've got happening here. He's released for a short time, and then I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. Now that's very key. We see thrones here. We're going to see a great white throne in this chapter in just a little bit. And what is the purpose of the people sitting on the throne, the ones sitting on the throne? They're going to execute judgment. Well, who do we find out in chapter 4 and 5 is sitting on the thrones? We are. The redeemed, the overcomers, the ones who have been judged in chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, the letters to the churches where the Lord says repeatedly, I have this against you, you better get your act together. And if you do get your act together and you become an overcomer, and then there's always something that will be given to the overcomer, a crown, a scepter, a throne. And in chapter 3, we see the 24 elders, which is representative of all believers of all time, seated where? On thrones. There's one on a throne, but there are these 24 thrones in front of that throne. And so here we've got the thrones again. And what are those people on the thrones going to do? They're going to judge. Who are those people on the thrones? You and me, the holy ones. Okay? And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus and because of the Word of God. And those who had not worshiped the beast or his image, that's that world system. that all-encompassing world system. They didn't get suckered into it. They didn't go down with it, and had not received the mark on their forehead and on their hand. And they came to life, and they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. So there's that rulership, that co-rulership with Christ, you see. And the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. And this is the first resurrection. And then there's a blessing, verse 6. Blessed and holy is the one who has part in the first resurrection, those overcomers. Over these the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years. So that co-rulership thing is woven into this whole passage, you see. Verse 7. And when the 1,000 years are completed, what's going to happen? Well, Satan will be released. The adversary, who is in this case the devil, will be released from his prison. The mudslinger will. He's newly energized now. And he will come out to deceive the nations. So he's back with the ethne again. Again, he's trying to get over the nations again, that for some period of time have been free from his influence and free from the influence of these other divine beings. But now they're back, and back in spades, newly energized. And he will set out to deceive the nations, which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for war. So what's he going to do? He and all these other divine beings that are fallen, they're going to give it one more college try. They're going to try and thwart the decree of Psalm 82, that they will be judged because of their abuse of their power, and they will die like men. And they're going to try and get the nations to ally with them so that that will be thwarted. But it's a short-lived plan. And he will come out to deceive the nations, which are in the four corners of the earth, and he will gather them together for war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore. And they came up on the broad plain of the earth, and they surrounded the camp of the saints, of the holy ones, and the beloved city. We're talking Zion talk there, okay? Whose home is Zion? Yahweh's home. It's the restored Eden. And we're there. We, the human holy ones and the divine holy ones, are all there, secure, in that camp of the saints and of the beloved city. And fire came down from heaven. So you get a revelation, where? From heaven, and devoured them. Okay? So judgment. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire. So this is not a battle of Armageddon type scene. It's not a protracted battle. It's not much at all. There's a supernatural demonstration. There is a revelation of God from heaven. And what does it do? It completely annihilates them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone. Where have we seen this lake of fire image before? Remember when we talked about Gehenna? And so it's back again. Lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also. So the world system is there too. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. We'll come back and talk about that. But notice who is not mentioned here. No humans mentioned here. Just these divine beings, these fallen beings. Those are mentioned. And the devil is chief among them. Then I saw a great white throne, as opposed to the other thrones that are already there, set there for judgment. Now there's a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose presence the earth and heaven fled away, and no place was found for them. Well, guess who's on that throne? And I saw the dead, the great and small, standing before the throne, and the books were open. So we're going to judge by the books here. Okay? The books were open, and another book was open, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged from these things which were written in the books according to their deeds. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it. So there's going to be this general resurrection of the dead. And Hades, the place of the dead, gave up the dead which were in them. Death and Hades. Remember when we talked about death and the grave? Those were divine beings. Those were fallen gods. So they released their prisoners now. They gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, and every one of them according to their deeds. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. So what do we get here? We get the death of death. So death dies. Death is eliminated. This is the second death, the lake of fire. Again, that Gehenna image. It's interesting. This is when we dealt with this some time ago. That image comes from Daniel 7. And it's interesting that in Daniel 7, when it talks about the death of death and the grave, the elimination of death and the grave, those divine beings, those demonic things, that there's present also a river of fire. So here you get that image again. And remember, fire is always an indicator of judgment, divine judgment. So you get that. Then death and Hades were thrown. There's more throwing. This is going to be the last throwing, by the way, into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. So death dies. We'll come back to that in a minute. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. Again, that final judgment. Well, let's take a look. We've got the devil, the mudslinger. We've already looked back into Revelation 12:9. And so we've got a replay of what we've seen before, the takedown of the mudslinger. Take a look in 1920. Somebody look that one up for us. And we're going to talk for a minute about why he gets released. It makes sense that he's bound. We've seen that before in chapter 12 with Michael the archangel. And it's fleshed out a little bit more there. But we're going to come to this issue which seems strange. He must be released. That's the word. But why? But before we do that, 1920 of Revelation. Somebody read that for us.
And the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, who in its presence had done the sign by which he had deceived those who had received the mark of the beast.
So, go ahead and finish up.
And those who worship its image, these two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur.
Whew, that Gehenna image, all right? Judgment. Probably not to take it literally, but the idea is it's judgment from God, okay? And you got these, the presence of his throne, God's throne, the great white throne, but you get the presence of these other thrones on which sat the holy ones, the divine holy ones, the human holy ones. That's what we saw in chapter 5 and 6. And so they show up here, sitting on thrones, ready to judge. So we somehow participate. That's in keeping with what Paul said. We will judge angels. We will judge. We, human holy ones, will judge these fallen divine holy ones. Okay? So that's all at play here. But but this strange mention here makes all kind of sense that he's bound. The devil, the mudslinger. It makes all kind of sense that he's thrown into an abyss, a pit. It makes all kind of sense that it's shut up and sealed so he can't get out. And it says, so that he would not deceive the nations, the ethne, any longer. These divine beings are not going to be over. They've been checked, all right, for a time. But it makes sense that all this would happen. But after these things, he must be released for a short time. What in the world's going on there? Think back to Genesis 3:1. Somebody turn there and be ready to read it. But what happens in Genesis 3:1, Genesis 3:21? What is it when the enemy, and there it is, Hasatan, the adversary, and we're told that that one is this one who's now bound for a time and will be released. The serpent of old, who is the devil, who is the accuser, the slanderer, the mudslinger, who is an adversary. The one who tripped up Eve is the one who's now bound. Okay, that divine being, that particular Hasatan, the devil, the mudslinger, the serpent of old. What's his approach to Eve? What does he say to her in 3:1?
Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Question or Socratic method.
Yeah, he poses it as a question, but it's pretty clear what he's implying. Is he telling the truth? When he says to her, didn't God say to you, you can't eat from any of the trees? That's a lie. God never said that. That's false. When he poses to her that question that way, he's reinforcing a falsehood. The idea that God wants to restrict your freedom is what he comes at her with. And that idea, the thing that he accuses God, that God wants to restrict your freedom, he accuses God of a lack of freedom toward his human creation. And that if you want a relationship with God, it comes on the basis of him restricting your freedom. That's an accusation that's false. But that lodges with her. That's her motivation. That's Adam's motivation. And that is kind of the thing that people return to over and over again. You get involved with God, what's he going to do? He's going to restrict your freedom. That's false. But it works its way into our religions, doesn't it? What do you remember growing up? What did they tell you? Thou shalt not. Listed. You
couldn't go to show, you couldn't dance, you couldn't do anything.
what was the phrase? Can't smoke, can't chew, can't go with them that do. But then there was a whole bunch of other things. Couldn't read the funny papers on Sunday. And that's just one segment of religious life. That is a narrow interpretation of Pentecostal Protestant Christianity. But you look anywhere, it's always about God restricts your freedom. If you want a relationship with him, he'll restrict your freedom. Islam, what does that word mean? Submission. You've got to submit to God. He will restrict what you do. What Satan said in the garden has carried the day. What the serpent of old said way back then has carried the day throughout all of human history for thousands of years. You want to get involved with God, just know that he's going to restrict your freedom. That is not true. That's the big lie. So what's going on with him being bound? Well, that makes sense. I released freedom. The very thing he accuses God of restricting, God gives him freedom. It says, not forever now, for a short time. He's been bound. Now he's got freedom. What did he accuse God of? You always restrict our freedom. You won't let us do what we want to do. Psalm 82, he had given them, the divine beings, the divine holy ones, he had given them unrestricted freedom, and they had abused it. As it says in Psalm 82, he put them over the ones that he put them, they were to administrate with him over those divine beings, and the devil among them, the mudslinger among them. They had abused their power. They had harmed people. They had taken advantage of the poor and the needy and the people that were in trouble. And the very people that they should have helped, they did not help. They abused their power, and for that reason, they will be judged and they will die like men. They will be eliminated. And so what we're seeing here is the final judgment on those divine beings, devil among them, the mudslinger among them. But how are they judged? How does God go about it? He gives him more freedom. And it's his freedom that spells his end. You see what God does here? If you read this passage carefully, we will find out it is not God who is punishing anybody, beings or human beings. They're doing it to themselves, and the agency with which they do it is their own freedom. The very thing that God is accused of restricting, he gives, and that's why the release for a short time. So that you have your freedom, but what's he do with his freedom? That becomes the instrument, the vehicle. The enemy destroys himself, seals his own doom, winds up along with death and Hades being thrown into the lake of fire, the second death. You see? Very interesting what's going on there. So it's the freedom question. In Genesis 3:1, the enemy questions the whole freedom thing. And the adversary works his own destruction by his freedom. We're going to see some other people's freedom too as this thing unfolds. But I wanted you to see that. That's why the enemy is released, to destroy himself by the very freedom that he claimed God restricted, which he didn't restrict. That was the big lie. So as Shakespeare would say, he was hoisted on his own petard. You know what a petard is? No. A little bomb, like a little hand grenade. And what Shakespeare was saying was, some clumsy soldiers, they drop their little bomb and it blows themselves up. They're hoisted on their own petard. That's exactly what Satan does here. His lie that God has restricted freedom, he's given freedom, and he kills himself with his own freedom. Take a look in Revelation 20, verse 4. It says there, "Then I saw thrones, and they that sat on them, and judgment was given to them." So that's what they're there for. Make no mistake. And who are those? Well, we're introduced to them in Revelation 4 and 5. It's us who will co-rule with Christ, who have a scepter and have a sword and have a crown and have a throne and have a white robe. And a white robe, that's the union suit. That's the union uniform of holy ones. That's why when angels appear, they're in gleaming white. And now we've got the gleaming white robe. That means we're in the same club. We're all holy ones together. Divine holy ones, human holy ones. That's who is here, and their purpose, judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded. So there's the martyrs, you see. Let's take a look and just camp there for a minute. Look in chapter 6, verse 9 through 11. Somebody else turn to chapter 7, verses 13 through 17. And let's see a little bit who we're talking about here. These people who are the object of the mudslingers' terror campaign. And see what happens to them in all this chaos with the release and the nations that are deceived and all of that. And then how the deceived nations may very possibly be the agents of the undoing of the devil. Take a look in 6, 9 through 11. Somebody read that out for us.
When he opened up the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and the testimony they had maintained. They called out in a loud voice, "How long, sovereign Lord, holy and true, until you judge the inhabitants of the earth and avenge our blood?" Then each of them was given a white robe, and they were told to wait a little longer until the full number of their fellow servants, their brothers and sisters, were killed just as they had been.
The judgment on the nations is primarily for how they have treated the holy ones, the human holy ones, the saints, we call them. And we know that they are the holy ones because they've got the uniform here they've been given. But their question is, how long, Lord? How long before we're avenged? How long before you avenge us on the divine fallen beings and the human fallen beings that have hurt us, that have persecuted us? And what are they told? Sit there in your white robe. You're fine. You're safe. And that's why we see them in the camp of the holy ones, the camp of the saints in our chapter 20. You're going to be safe. Nobody's going to hurt you anymore. Rest a little while longer until the number of their fellow servants, so there are going to be more that are going to be killed, even as they were. And when that happens, then, and the then is now in chapter 20. We get the judgment on the nations, the final judgment on the nations, and we get the final judgment on the ones who are motivating all that ugliness. Take a look in chapter 7, verse 13 through 17. Then one of the elders, this is John talking, and he sees all these people in white robes, all these holy ones, these saints in white robes. And remember, holy ones is a name that's used for divine beings that are good. It's also a name that's used for human beings that are on God's side. That's why we're called saints. It means holy ones. Then one of the elders, this is one of the people that sits on one of the thrones. They're in the heavenly courtroom scene, in the divine council scene. Now you've got the divine council is made up of humans and divine. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, these who are clothed in white robes. And he asked John, who are they? And where have they come from? And I said to him, my Lord, you know. And not Lord like divine, but title of honor. Think of the English lords, my Lord. My Lord, you know. And he said to me, he's playing this little interview game with him, and then he said to me, these are the ones who have come out of the great tribulation, and they have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. For this reason, they are before the throne of God, and they serve him day and night in his temple. His temple is his home. That's the new Eden. So Eden is already restored in this picture, you see? And the holy ones are already there. And he who sits on the throne will spread his tabernacle over them. His home, mikasa es sukasa, is what God is saying here. And will spread his tabernacle over them, and they will hunger no longer. Whatever deprivations they have suffered, no more. They will hunger no longer, nor thirst any more, nor will the sun beat down on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb in the center of the throne will be their shepherd. The Lamb will be their shepherd. The wounded Lamb, the slaughtered Lamb will be their shepherd. The one who was the only one worthy to open the scroll so that this whole thing could get off to a start. And he will guide them to springs of the water of life. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Wow. That's who we're seeing here in chapter 20, verse 4. I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded, the martyrs, those that had suffered for Christ, those that were persecuted by the beast and the serpent and the system, and even by some nations, okay? Nations that were under the ugly divine beings that Paul calls demons. And they had not received the mark on their forehead or on their hand, and they came to life, and they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Okay? So we've got them. We've got the souls who are the objects of the mudslingers' terror campaign. They asked the question in chapter 6 and 7, how long? And now they're being vindicated. And it's going to be pretty quick work. So let's move to verse 7. And 1,000 years are completed. Satan, who in this case, this Hasatan, we know is the devil, the dragon, the serpent of old, the one at the beginning, will be released from his prison, the one who lied, the one who passes off this big lie that if you want a relationship with God, he's going to take away your freedom. He's released, and we talk about why he's released, because it's his freedom, the thing that he says God doesn't grant, God grants, and that's the thing that's going to hang him. Take a look in, let's read down in verse 8. And will come out to deceive the nations, the ethne, who are under those divine beings. And that's the reference to the Gog and Magog thing. Those are territories under malevolent divine beings, to gather them together for war. And the number of them is like the sand of the seashore. Okay, so a lot. And we know that the dragon, the serpent of old, the devil, this particular Hasatan, adversary, is going to be destroyed. We know that's his fate. But who is it that does the destroying? Take a look in Ezekiel 28, verses 1 through 10. Somebody else look in Revelation 17, 15 through 17, which we looked at last week, so it'll be familiar. And here is a possibility, okay? People read the book of Revelation and they say, oh man, God it's his wrath, and he's doing all this punishing and all this destroying. But here we get this re-energized, newly released devil, mudslinger. He gets his freedom, which he says God doesn't give, God gives him. And he goes about deceiving the nations with it and going back to his old ways. He's going to try and thwart the judgment of Psalm 82, you will die like men. And he gets people to come alongside him to stop God's plan, which he deserves. And he's going to be judged, and he's going to be thrown down into the lake of fire, another throwing, along with the beast and the false prophet that are there. And he's going to be there forever, and we'll talk about forever in just before we leave. But who is the one that's actually doing the punishing of this character? Take a look in Ezekiel 28, 1 through 10. Very interesting passage. Before we get there, let's do it backwards. Somebody read what we're already familiar with from last week, Revelation 17, 15 through 17. This is where we saw the system, the whore of Babylon, the harlot. And we're told who that harlot is. It's Babylon. It's the system. Well, the system is going to be judged. The system is going to be punished. The system is going to be destroyed. But who does the destroying of the system? 17, 15 through 17. Somebody read that for us.
Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled.
We're told earlier in the chapter who those kings are, those horns are. It's kings of the earth that have aligned themselves, we find out in chapter 18, mostly for commercial interests, with the system, with the whore of Babylon, with Babylon. And who brings down Babylon? The nations. It could be that what we're seeing here in 17 and what we're seeing in 20, when the system comes down, when the mudslinger is judged and is punished and is brought down, that it's not God doing it. It's the nations that have been deceived. They turn on, as these kings have turned on Babylon, as these many waters that Babylon sits on, which are nations and languages and tribes and tongues, they turn on the system. It may be that what we're seeing here in 20 is that the nations that get deceived turn on the deceiver. That may be who brings him down. You see? In other words, when they see what's really going on, and that they're going to be the losers, the nations turn away from the enemy and they bring him down. Look in Ezekiel 28, 1 through 10. And we played around with Ezekiel before. The word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man, say to the leader of Tyre, and if you remember when we went through some of this, Tyre is a stand-in for Satan, for the devil, for the mudslinger. Because your heart is lifted up, and this sounds very much like what we see in Isaiah 14, where this one who's called the Shining One is judged because of his great pride, saying, I will become like the Most High. Because your heart is lifted up and you have said, I am a God. I sit in the seat of gods, in the heart of the seas, the people, the nations. Yet you are a man and not God. Remember, you will die like men. Although you make your heart like the heart of God, behold, you are wiser than Daniel. There's no secret that is a match for you. The Lord is using sarcasm here. By your wisdom and understanding, you have acquired riches for yourself. Again, go back to the Revelation 18, the commercial interests of the system that's motivated by the dragon. And you have acquired gold and silver for your treasuries by your great wisdom, by your trade. Remember the merchants of the earth. They wail and moan when Babylon comes down. You have increased your riches, and your heart is lifted up because of your riches. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, Yahweh, because you have made your heart like the heart of God, therefore, behold, I will bring strangers upon you, the most ruthless of the nations, and they will draw their swords against the beauty of your wisdom and defile your splendor. They will bring you down to the pit, the abyss. And you will die the death of those who are slain. Psalm 82, you will die like men. In the heart of the seas, the waters, the many waters, it's the nations, you see? Will you still say, I am a God? In the presence of your slayer? Who is his slayer? It's the nations. Though you are a man and not God, again, you will die like a man. In the hands of those who wound you, you will die the death of the uncircumcised by the hand of strangers, for I have spoken, declares the Lord God. You couple that with what we see in Revelation 17, and the kings and the nations turn on Babylon, the harlot, the system, motivated by the serpent. Is it really God that's going to bring them down? Or is it the ones they've deceived, who at some point wise up? Just interesting, isn't it? Just an interesting take on it. Because you notice it says in Ezekiel 28, we just read down through verse 10. Look at verse 14. You were the anointed cherub who covers, and I placed you there. You were on the holy mountain of God. Remember, the mountain is Eden. It's Zion. It's the home of God. That's where the devil was. You were on the holy mountain of God. You were in my home. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. Drop down to 17. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. Here's his pride again. Like, it talks about in Isaiah 14. You corrupted your wisdom by reason of your splendor. I cast you to the ground, more throwing down. Again, Psalm 82. I put you before kings. That's what we see in Revelation 17. Who brings it down? The kings of the earth. The ones who fooled, the ones who were aligned with. I put you before kings that they may see you. One of the amazing things that Isaiah 17 talks about when the Lucifer, the shining one, who says, I will ascend, I will be like the Most High, and for that reason is cast to a pit. One of the most striking features is at the end it says that those who were your prisoners that you would not let go free, the nations that you caused to tremble, will gather around and will say, is this the one who wouldn't let prisoners go free? This is the one. So here you've got it in Ezekiel 28, verse 17, in the midst of, they'll look. Interesting phrase. The downfall of this one in Ezekiel 28, the downfall of this one in Revelation 17, it's from the midst of you. It comes from within, not from without. So what I'm saying is, one of the things everybody knows about Revelation, it's one of those things everybody knows that doesn't happen to be maybe so. Like there are 3 wise men and so on, and that the fruit was an apple and all of that. All these things that everybody knows. Maybe one of the things that everybody knows, that Revelation is the story of God just exploding and just raining down wrath on the devil and punishing the devil. Maybe the ones that bring him down are the ones who are enraged because he's deceived them. Take a look in Revelation 17:16 again. Read it one more time. Got it, Mike?
Verse 16.
16.
The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire.
Oh my gosh.
For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled.
So the role of God in all this is he allows the ones who've been deceived to come against the deceiver. So what we're looking at is the rage of the deceived against the deceiver. I just posit it as a possibility. Because with this Ezekiel 28 and this Revelation 17, and then what we see here in 20, with the final judgment on this one that was released for a short time, that had to be released, could it be that that's what we're seeing here? You're seeing the rage, the wrath of the deceived against the deceiver. Take a look at that verse 10. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into a lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. But it doesn't say anything about people being there. Not even the people that align themselves this final time with the devil. So it is possible that what we're seeing here with Ezekiel, with Revelation 17, is that they wise up and they turn against the devil. They renounce the devil, this rival god that they've been under, and all of his other rival gods. You see? And so what we've got here is a fulfillment of where we started in this study 3+ years ago, Psalm 82, judgment on the gods of the nations. The devil being among those, possibly the chief god among those. Judgment of the gods of the nations. You will die like men. And that Revelation 20:10 does mention the devil who deceives. So what we may be seeing is the deceived are turning against the deceiver. There's a mention about the holy ones in Zion. It says that they are safe. They're in their camp. The chaos on the outside, it does not get into the throne room scene there. The holy ones are there. And could this be the time that Paul talked about when the holy ones, the saints, do you not know that you will judge angels? And those fallen angels, again, are the rival gods, and that may be what we're seeing here. But what we do know for sure is what destroys the devil and those that are allied with him is they are destroyed by a revelation. You see that? Fire came down from where? Heaven, and devoured them. Well, that's a supernatural act. That's God revealing himself. Again, fire, literally if you want to, but it means judgment for sure. And they're destroyed by revelation, by seeing this one who's in the holy mountain, who's in his home, with his family, human and divine. They come against it, the devil does, and it's a divine revelation that destroys them. They finally see who it is that they're dealing with, and they have to reckon with that. So they're destroyed by revelation. In other words, the devil faces a meltdown, literally, if you want to take the fire literally. And the evil enterprise that has been the system, that has been the devil, that has been evil, it implodes. It implodes. And it implodes in the presence of this blinding presence of the home of Yahweh, the Most High. In his home, surrounded by his family, human and divine, the mountain, Mount Zion. In the safety of that camp, it says here, that there's this meltdown of the devil and of evil and it implodes in the presence of that blinding presence of God. So let's take a look at the word forever for a minute. I think we're doing just fine. Take a look in Jeremiah 17:4, Isaiah 34:10, and it talks about forever. It says that they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And then you get the death of death in 14, and death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. This is the final throwing down, the lake of fire. That river of fire in Daniel 7, Gehenna that Jesus talked about. The important thing for us is death dies. This is a judgment on death. Remember, we've pictured death and the grave as evil beings. They were gods that were worshipped. They were some of the gods of the nations, and here they die. They die too. Jeremiah 17:4. Somebody read that for us.
Through your own fault, you will lose the inheritance I gave you. I will enslave you to your enemies in a land you do not know, for you have kindled my anger, and it will burn forever.
Okay. This is judgment on Israel. The reason I direct you to this verse, and Isaiah 34 is kind of similar, is that when it's talking about forever, it may be, and a lot of people get hung up on this, with the idea of eternal conscious torment forever. For the devil, for the beast, for humans. But in Jeremiah, in 17, Isaiah 34, but a whole bunch of other places, when it talks about forever, as it talks about it here in Jeremiah 17, judgment on Israel, it means finality. In the sense of a word we use a lot, closure. It means closure. It's not always a reference to duration, forever. That they will be conscious and forever they will die forever. Be a continually ongoing death, a forever death. It may mean not duration, but it may be a reference to finality, closure. We're done with all of it. Because it does say, then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. So death dies. There is no more death. Take a look in 21:4. What are we told about it there? And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes. We've seen this language before for the holy ones that were martyred. And there will no longer be any death. And there will no longer be any mourning. Why? Because there's no death or crying or pain. And the first things have passed away. There will no longer be any death. Death is dead. Death is over. Death is done. Now, verse 15, and if anyone's name is not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. But I notice that verse 14 comes before verse 15. And in verse 14, what dies? Death dies. Death dies. This is the lake of fire. This is the second death. Death dies. There's no more grave. There's no more death. Death is gone. The devil and evil is gone. Yahweh and the holy ones have triumphed, you see. Death and the grave are gone. Evil, the devil, gone. And as I said, Yahweh and the holy ones, divine and human, have triumphed over this. And the judgment by the books is over, you see. And when it says, if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. That word if is a very important word. Maybe nobody was found. If the ones that were deceived turn on the deceiver, they come out from the gods of the nations. Maybe there's nobody that's not written in the book. All I know is that verse 15 follows verse 14, and verse 14 says death is dead. Separation is dead. So I leave you with that. What may have happened, and when we talked about hell and all of that, and we won't revisit that, the whole idea of eternal conscious torment for the devil, for the beast, for the prophet, for humans, which comes from, and we talked about that, it doesn't come from the Bible, it comes from extra biblical sources. It comes from Zoroastrianism and Dante and Milton, other places. But it doesn't seem to come from the Bible. The only time the Bible talks about a conscious eternal torment is divine beings. But that comes from extra biblical sources, and it's been mapped onto this text, verses 14 and 15, that it talks about the end of the devil and the end of the gods and the end of Eden and the end of evil. And a fulfillment of Psalm 82. So what's next? All that out of the way, the road is paved for Eden. That's what's next. So we'll leave it there. And for those that are watching online, thanks for joining us. And we will see you next time. So thank you very much. And that leaves a question.